Looking at Norway, is dominant by a lot of people owning their own flats. There's very little letting opportunities in Oslo, in Bergen, and in the others. But there's also those that where you have built for rent, so apartments for rent. There are no really top professional player in that field. It's mostly people who own a few apartments and then they rent them out themselves. Mostly, so dominant by owners occupied. That's a big issue. In Sweden, you have a growing wish to own your own apartment, but you have two dominant factors here. You have a lot of the municipalities owning a lot of stock, a lot of apartments that they then rent out, and then you have this communal-based ownership of an apartment block where you sort of share the responsibility. So you buy a share of a block and then you have the right to live in your apartment. In Finland, it's basically both owner-occupied and letting. But here you have to be aware of one very important fact, and that is that 4 people is used to living at about 60 square meters apartment. Whereas if you go to Denmark and you want to rent there, normally 4 people would require 90 to 100 square meters. So that's something you need to keep in mind for, is the cultural aspect of how do you actually live in your apartments, what's the culture for how much space you have in your apartments. In Denmark, it's very interesting. If you take Copenhagen, 80% of the stock for residential is actually built before 91, which means that it is either for rent or it is, again, these communal ownerships where you buy a share. It's only the last 20% that is more owner-occupied or can be divided into owner-occupied, so you can sell them on the market. So that's sort of the main features, you can say, headlines about the markets where you are. One thing, though, is, and that is for all the Nordic countries, we have an urbanization going on in the Nordic countries, which also comes into your aspect of where you actually want to let out money. That means that the big cities are growing and they're growing fast. And the smaller cities and the province is actually slowly but surely dying. It also means that we're growing so much in the capital cities that the demand for residential units is higher than what we actually have. So in all of the Nordic capitals, there is no vacancy in apartments, basically. If there's vacancy, it's either structural, because of you wanted to sell it on the market, or you're refurbishing it. So that's a big key, and it's a big issue for us, which also you can see by a lot of the local pension funds going in and really investing in residential and new build residential in all of these markets.